I'm going to need to see your boarding pass again because there's obviously been some kind of mistake. Diana Montgomery looked up from her tablet where she'd been reviewing the quarterly safety reports, her fingers still poised over the screen, showing a 47% improvement in customer satisfaction ratings across her fleet. The flight attendant, a thin woman with severely pulled-back blonde hair and a smile that never reached her eyes, stood blocking the aisle with the kind of aggressive politeness that barely concealed contempt. "I'm sorry." Diana's voice carried the measured calm of someone who'd learned early that any display of emotion would be weaponized against her. "Your boarding pass. I need to verify you're in the correct seat." The attendant's eyes swept over Diana's tailored navy suit, the Hermes bag tucked neatly beside her, the first-class seat she'd been occupying for the past 20 minutes. Sometimes people get confused about their ticket class. The cabin had gone unnaturally quiet. Diana felt the familiar weight of 40 pairs of eyes studying her, waiting to see how this would unfold. She'd felt this same crushing awareness countless times before, in boardrooms where she was the only woman of color, at industry conferences where people assumed she was someone's assistant, at charity galas where donors questioned whether she could afford the ticket price. "There's no confusion," Diana said, pulling her boarding pass from the seat pocket with deliberate slowness. "Seat 2A. First class." The attendant snatched the pass, studying it with theatrical intensity. And how exactly did you afford a first-class ticket to London?" The question hung in the air like poison gas. "Because these seats cost more than most people make in a month." Diana's throat tightened. In her peripheral vision, she could see other passengers leaning forward, some with phones already recording. A businessman across the aisle whispered something to his companion. Behind her, she heard a woman's sharp intake of breath. "This is exactly why I usually take the company jet," Diana thought, remembering how her assistant had insisted the Gulfstream needed emergency maintenance and she should take the commercial flight instead. 20 years of building this company from nothing, and I still can't sit in first class without someone questioning whether I belong here. "I purchased my ticket the same way everyone else did," Diana replied, accepting her boarding pass back. "With money." "Right." The attendant's laugh was sharp, humorless. "Well, I'm getting reports that you're making other passengers uncomfortable. Some people feel like you don't fit the usual demographic for this cabin." The words hit Diana like a physical blow, but she kept her expression neutral. She'd learned this skill as a teenager working 3 jobs to pay for college, perfected it during her years climbing the corporate ladder, and mastered it during the brutal early days of starting Montgomery Aviation when banks wouldn't even return her calls. "I see." Diana's fingers found the small compass pendant at her throat, a gift from her grandmother, engraved with the words True North. It had been her touchstone through every moment of doubt, every instance of discrimination, every time someone told her she didn't belong. And which passengers specifically expressed these concerns? The attendant's eyes darted around the cabin, landing nowhere. That's confidential. Company policy." "Company policy." Diana almost smiled at the irony. If only this woman knew exactly whose company policy she was invoking. "Listen," the attendant continued, her voice dropping to what she probably thought was a reasonable whisper but carried clearly through the hushed cabin. "I'm sure you're a perfectly nice person, but we have protocols. Maybe you'd be more comfortable in coach? I could see about getting you upgraded for a future flight when it's more appropriate." The suggestion landed like a slap. Diana felt something cold and hard settle in her chest, not anger exactly, but something far more dangerous. The quiet fury of a woman who'd spent her entire life being underestimated. "Hey, my friend, hope you're doing well. Drop a comment and let me know how you're feeling about this story so far and where you are watching from. Some stories are too close to my heart to share on YouTube. I send those, along with little life lessons and surprises, to my email circle. If you'd like to be part of it, you can join with the link in the description." "More appropriate," Diana repeated slowly, each word precise and measured. Around them, the cabin had gone dead silent except for the steady hum of the engines. And when exactly would that be? The attendant shifted uncomfortably. "Well, I just think." "You think what?" Diana's voice remained calm, but something in her tone made the woman take a half-step back. "That I somehow snuck past security, past the gate agents, past the boarding crew, and managed to steal a first-class seat? That I'm running some elaborate scam involving fake documentation?" "I never said." "Or perhaps you think I'm some kind of criminal who somehow acquired a boarding pass through illegal means?" Diana continued, her voice never rising above conversational level. Because I'm struggling to understand what other explanation there could be for your behavior. The attendant's face had gone pale, then flushed red. I'm just following protocol. Protocol. Diana turned the word over like she was examining a fascinating specimen. Tell me, what's your name? What? Your name. It should be on your badge. Diana's eyes found the small silver nameplate pinned to the woman's uniform. Rachel Dale. And how long have you worked for Atlantic Airways, Rachel? 3 years, but I don't see what that has to. 3 years. Diana nodded thoughtfully. So you've been here since before the merger. Rachel's brow furrowed. What merger? Diana reached into her bag and pulled out a thin leather portfolio, extracting a single sheet of paper. The Atlantic Airways letterhead gleamed under the cabin lights. The merger that made Atlantic Airways a wholly owned subsidiary of Montgomery Aviation Group 18 months ago. The color drained from Rachel's face as she stared at the document. Diana watched her eyes scan the corporate masthead, saw the exact moment when understanding began to dawn. I don't understand, Rachel whispered. Let me clarify. Diana's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to commanding boardrooms full of powerful men. You've just spent the last 10 minutes questioning whether I belong in first class, whether I can afford my ticket, whether I'm making other passengers uncomfortable by existing in their vicinity. She paused, letting each word sink in. You've done this while I'm sitting on an aircraft operated by a company that I don't just own stock in, Rachel. I own it. Completely. Every plane, every route, every employee. The portfolio slipped from Rachel's suddenly nerveless fingers. Including you. The portfolio hit the aircraft floor with a sound like breaking glass. Rachel stared down at the scattered papers, corporate documents, ownership certificates, a photograph of Diana shaking hands with the Secretary of Transportation at last year's Aviation Safety Awards, and Diana watched the woman's entire worldview crumble in real time. This can't be real, Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible over the engine noise. Diana had seen this expression before. The same stunned disbelief that crossed bank executives' faces when she'd walked into their mahogany-paneled offices to acquire their transportation loans. The same shock that flickered across competitors' features when they realized the diversity hire they'd dismissed had just outmaneuvered them for a multi-million-dollar contract. Captain Fletcher, Diana called toward the cockpit, her voice carrying the easy authority of someone used to being obeyed. Could you join us for a moment? The cockpit door opened, and a silver-haired man in his 50s emerged, his captain's uniform immaculate. James Fletcher had been flying for Diana's company for 8 years, ever since she'd poached him from United with a salary package that doubled his previous income and gave him actual respect for his decades of experience. Ms. Montgomery, he said warmly. Then his expression shifted as he took in the scene. Rachel's pale face, the scattered papers, the tension crackling through the cabin like electricity. Is everything all right? Captain Fletcher, meet Ms. Dale. She's been questioning whether I belong in first class. James's eyes went hard. Diana had hired him not just for his exceptional flying record, but because he understood what it meant to be underestimated. He'd grown up in rural Montana, the son of a mechanic, and had fought his way through flight school while wealthy classmates dismissed him as not officer material. James said to Rachel, his voice carrying 30 years of command authority. I believe you owe Ms. Montgomery an apology. And then I believe you owe her your resignation. Wait. Rachel's hands were shaking as she bent to gather the papers. I didn't know. How could I have known? She never said anything. She shouldn't have had to, said a voice from across the aisle. Diana turned to see an elderly black woman in seat 4B rising slowly, her movements careful but dignified. She wore a simple gray dress and pearl earrings, and something about her bearing commanded immediate respect. Young lady, the woman continued, addressing Rachel with the kind of quiet authority that only comes from decades of experience. That woman you just humiliated? She's been sitting here for 20 minutes, minding her own business, reading what looked like corporate reports. Professional, polite, appropriately dressed. And your first instinct was to assume she didn't belong. Diana felt something crack open in her chest. For 20 years, she'd fought these battles alone, armed herself with achievements and accolades and enough money to buy respect. But hearing this stranger, this grandmother who didn't know her from any other passenger, defend her dignity hit harder than any corporate victory. Mrs. Diana asked softly. Dorothy Williams. And I've been watching this whole thing unfold. Dorothy's eyes found Diana's, and in them, Diana saw a lifetime of her own struggles reflected back. Honey, I've been riding planes for 60 years. I was one of the first black stewardesses for TWA back when they made us jump through hoops just to serve coffee to white passengers. I know discrimination when I see it. The cabin had become a theater, with every passenger now openly watching the drama unfold. Diana noticed a young man in 3C recording everything on his phone, a middle-aged woman in pearls shaking her head in disgust, and, most troubling, a man in an expensive suit who seemed to be taking notes. "Ms. Montgomery," Rachel said desperately, "please, I have 2 kids. I need this job." I was just what? Diana's voice was quiet, but it cut through Rachel's pleading like a blade. Just following your training? Just implementing company policy? Or just acting on assumptions you've never examined? Rachel's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Diana had spent the morning before this flight in her corner office, reviewing the diversity and inclusion reports that her HR director had been begging her to read for months. The statistics had been damning. Despite her company's official policies, discrimination complaints had increased 23% over the past year. She'd been planning to address it in the quarterly board meeting, had already drafted new training protocols, had even hired an outside consulting firm. But sitting here now, watching one of her own employees demonstrate exactly why those reports existed, Diana felt the crushing weight of her own failure. She'd built a billion-dollar company, had created jobs for thousands of people, had broken barriers and changed industries. But she hadn't been able to change this. In her own aircraft, wearing the uniform that bore her company's logo, an employee felt comfortable humiliating a passenger based purely on the color of her skin. "Captain Fletcher," Diana said, her voice carefully controlled, "I want a full report on Ms. Dale's training records. Specifically, her customer service training and any incidents in her personnel file." "Already on it," James replied, pulling out his phone. Diana could see him texting someone, probably Victor Webb, her head of HR, who would be mortified when he learned about this. "Ms. Montgomery," said a new voice, and Diana's attention snapped to the man in the expensive suit. He was lean, professionally groomed, with the kind of smile that set off every alarm bell she'd developed over 2 decades in business. "David Sterling, Sterling Industries." I couldn't help but overhear this situation. Sterling Industries. Diana's blood went cold. They were her biggest competitor, a family-owned aviation conglomerate that had been trying to acquire her smaller routes for years. David Sterling was the founder's son, known for his aggressive business tactics and his public statements about maintaining industry standards. "Mr. Sterling," Diana replied carefully. "Quite a scene you've caused here," he continued, his voice carrying just enough sympathy to seem genuine. "I imagine this is the last kind of publicity your company needs right now. Discrimination scandals can be devastating to corporate image." There it was, the threat wrapped in concern, the knife sliding between her ribs with a smile. Diana understood immediately. He'd witnessed the entire exchange, had probably recorded parts of it, and was now positioning himself to weaponize her employees' racism against her company. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Sterling?" "Threatening?" His laugh was practiced, corporate. "Ms. Montgomery, I'm offering to help. These things can get blown out of proportion on social media. One video goes viral, and suddenly your company is facing boycotts, congressional investigations, stock price crashes. I've seen it happen." Diana felt the familiar surge of rage that had fueled every major decision of her career. The same anger that had driven her to mortgage her grandmother's house to buy her first plane. The same fury that had sustained her through 18-hour days and impossible odds and men exactly like David Sterling who thought they could intimidate her into submission. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A merger," he said smoothly. "Sterling Industries acquiring Montgomery Aviation. You'd stay on as a subsidiary president, of course. Keep your current compensation package. But this way, when this incident makes the news, and it will make the news, it won't destroy everything you've built." The betrayal hit her like ice water. Not from Rachel, whose ignorance was disappointing but expected. Not even from the passengers who'd sat silently while she was humiliated. But from this man who saw her moment of triumph, revealing her ownership, asserting her dignity, and immediately moved to weaponize it against her. "You planned this," Diana said quietly. Sterling's smile never wavered. "I plan to offer you a generous exit strategy from an unfortunate situation." "No." Diana stood, and somehow the simple movement commanded the attention of everyone in first class. "You plan to use my employees' racism as leverage in a hostile takeover. Ms. Montgomery, I think you're boarding this flight, recording this encounter, positioning yourself to profit from my humiliation." Diana's voice was steady, but Dorothy Williams must have heard something in it, because the older woman was watching her with sharp concern. Sterling spread his hands in a gesture of innocence. "I'm simply a businessman who recognizes opportunity." "So am I," Diana replied. "And I recognize predators." The plane chose that moment to hit turbulence, and Diana gripped her armrest as the aircraft shuddered. But the physical instability was nothing compared to the realization crashing over her. This wasn't just about one discriminatory employee. This was about her entire company being under attack, her life's work being threatened by someone who saw her moment of dignity as ammunition for corporate warfare. And she was 30,000 feet above the Atlantic with nowhere to run. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." James Fletcher's voice crackled through the intercom, but Diana heard something in his tone that made her stomach drop. "We're experiencing some technical difficulties and will need to make an emergency landing in Boston. Please remain seated, Anne." The announcement cut off abruptly. Diana was halfway to the cockpit when her phone buzzed with an emergency alert from her company's crisis management system. The message made her blood freeze. "Urgent. Montgomery Aviation stock down 12% in last hour. Social media storm brewing. Video of discrimination incident viral. Emergency board meeting called. Response required immediately." 12%, she whispered, staring at the screen. In 1 hour, her company had lost nearly $200 million in market value. "Ms. Montgomery." Dorothy Williams had risen from her seat, her face creased with concern. "What's happening?" Diana looked around the cabin and felt the walls closing in. Rachel Dale stood frozen by the galley, tears streaming down her face as she stared at her own phone. Other passengers were pulling out devices, their faces illuminating with the blue glow of screens. And David Sterling sat back in his seat with the satisfied expression of a man whose plan was unfolding perfectly. "The video," Diana said, the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. Someone live-streamed the entire confrontation. Sterling's smile was razor-sharp. Social media moves fast these days. #Montgomery discrimination is already trending, along with #boycott Montgomery Aviation and #racist airlines. He gestured to his phone. 2 million views and climbing. Diana's phone rang. Victor Webb, her head of HR, his name flashing on the screen with the red priority indicator she'd only seen twice before, during the 2019 pilot strike and when they'd lost their biggest government contract to a competitor. "Diana, thank God." Victor's voice was tight with panic. "Are you seeing this? The board is going insane. Richardson is calling for your immediate resignation. The pilots' union is demanding a statement. 3 major corporate clients have already suspended their contracts pending investigation." "Slow down," Diana said, even as her mind raced through the implications. Richardson was the lead investor, a man who'd bet $50 million on her company but had always made it clear he considered her a risk. If he was calling for her resignation, "I can't slow down. CNN just called. They want a statement in 30 minutes or they are running with Montgomery Aviation CEO silent on discrimination scandal. The Washington Post is preparing a deep dive on workplace culture at your company. And..." Victor's voice cracked. "Diana, someone leaked your diversity reports to the press." The phone slipped from Diana's hand, clattering to the floor. "The diversity reports?" Dorothy asked quietly. She'd moved closer, and Diana realized the older woman had been listening to every word. "Internal documents showing discrimination complaints in my company have increased 23% over the past year." Diana's voice sounded hollow to her own ears. "Reports I've been trying to address, but now they make you look like you knew and did nothing," Sterling finished helpfully. "Corporate malfeasance. Willful negligence. The kind of thing that brings down companies and sends executives to prison." Diana turned to face him fully, and in his eyes she saw something that made her skin crawl. Not just opportunism, but genuine satisfaction. "You orchestrated this." "I took advantage of an opportunity your employee provided." Sterling stood, straightening his jacket. "Rachel Dale's behavior toward you was deplorable, yes. But it was also illuminating. About the culture you've allowed to fester in your company." "Allowed to fester." The words came out as a growl. "Face it, Diana. You've been so focused on building your empire that you forgot to build a proper foundation. Your diversity training is inadequate. Your hiring practices are questionable. Your company culture enables exactly the kind of discrimination we just witnessed." Sterling's voice took on a tone of mock sympathy. "I'm offering you a way out before this destroys everything." Captain Fletcher emerged from the cockpit, his face grim. Ms. Montgomery, we need to talk. Now. Diana followed him to the small galley area, her legs feeling unsteady. Through the small window, she could see the lights of Boston growing larger below them. The emergency landing isn't mechanical, James said quietly. I got a call from federal aviation authorities. There's a congressional investigation being launched into Montgomery Aviation's workplace practices. They want the plane grounded pending examination of crew training records. A congressional investigation. Diana felt like she was drowning. Based on a single incident. Based on a viral video showing discrimination by our staff, combined with leaked internal documents suggesting systemic problems. James's voice was gentle but firm. Diana, someone with serious political connections is pushing this. Hard. Sterling. Diana's eyes found him across the cabin, now speaking quietly into his phone. Everything about this was too coordinated, too fast, too perfectly timed to be coincidental. There's more, James continued. I just got word that Sterling Industries has made a formal acquisition offer to your board of directors. They are calling it a rescue package for a company in crisis. The point of no return rushed toward Diana like the ground below. In the space of 1 hour, her company was hemorrhaging value, under federal investigation, and facing a hostile takeover. All because she'd had the audacity to sit in first class while black and defend her right to do so. Rachel Dale appeared beside them, her face puffy from crying. I just got a call from my supervisor. They are firing me. Effective immediately. She looked at Diana with desperate eyes. Please. I know I was wrong. I know I messed up. But I have kids. I have a mortgage. If I could just what? Diana's exhaustion was bone deep. Pretend this didn't happen? Ignore the fact that you humiliated me and potentially destroyed my company in the process. I didn't know this would happen. I didn't know someone was recording. I didn't know you owned the company. Rachel's voice rose to near hysteria. You didn't know because you didn't care to know, said a new voice. Diana turned to see a tall man in his early 40s standing behind them. He wore a simple button-down shirt and jeans, and something about his calm presence cut through the chaos like a knife. She hadn't noticed him during the confrontation. He must have been in the bathroom or sleeping, but now he commanded attention effortlessly. Dr. Jonathan Hayes, he said, extending a hand to Diana. I'm a crisis management consultant. I work with companies facing exactly this kind of situation. Sterling had appeared beside them as if materialized. I don't believe we need outside consultants. Actually, Dr. Hayes continued, ignoring Sterling completely, I specialize in helping organizations survive coordinated attacks designed to force acquisitions or ownership changes. His eyes met Diana's. Attacks exactly like the one being perpetrated against Montgomery Aviation right now. Diana felt something shift in her chest. You think this is coordinated? I know it is. Dr. Hayes pulled out a tablet, showing her a complex web diagram. Social media amplification patterns, political pressure timelines, leaked document distribution. This has all the hallmarks of corporate warfare. Someone has been planning this for months, waiting for the right trigger event. Diana's phone buzzed again. Another emergency alert, stock down 18%. 3 board members calling emergency vote on Sterling acquisition. Your presence required immediately upon landing. The plane shuddered as they began their descent into Boston. Through the window, Diana could see news vans already gathered on the tarmac, their satellite dishes pointed skyward like weapons. Ms. Montgomery, Dr. Hayes said quietly, you're about to face a choice that will determine not just the future of your company, but the future of every woman and person of color trying to build something in corporate America. What happened to you today wasn't an isolated incident, it was a test. And how you respond will determine whether people like David Sterling get to use discrimination as a weapon to destroy everything you've built. Diana looked around the cabin one more time. At Rachel, whose racism had provided the ammunition. At Sterling, whose predatory opportunism had weaponized it. At Dorothy Williams, who was watching her with the kind of fierce hope that demanded courage. At Captain Fletcher, whose loyalty had never wavered. At Dr. Hayes, who seemed to understand the true scope of what she was facing. And at the window, where the lights of Boston beckoned like a courtroom where her entire life's work would be judged. What exactly are you proposing, Dr. Hayes? That instead of allowing them to destroy you, he said, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who'd fought these battles before, we destroy the system that makes this possible. Diana felt something crystallize in her chest. Not just anger anymore, but purpose. She thought of her grandmother, who'd cleaned houses for 50 years and saved every penny to help Diana buy her first plane. She thought of the thousands of employees whose livelihoods depended on Montgomery Aviation. She thought of every young woman of color who might see her surrender and learn that no amount of success could protect them from being diminished. "Tell me what you need," she said. And somewhere over the Atlantic, Diana Montgomery declared war. The moment Diana's feet touched the Boston tarmac, she understood the true scope of the war being waged against her. 30 news crews lined the terminal building like a firing squad, their cameras tracking her movement through the airport windows. Her phone had become a weapon of psychological warfare, buzzing every 15 seconds with crisis alerts, board member demands, and media requests that felt more like ultimatums. Diana Montgomery refuses to comment on discrimination scandal. A reporter's voice drifted across the tarmac from a live broadcast. Dr. Jonathan Hayes fell into step beside her, his presence oddly calming amid the chaos. "The media positioning is deliberate," he said quietly, scrolling through his tablet as they walked. "Notice how they are not asking about the investigation or the acquisition offer. They are focused purely on character assassination." Diana glanced at him sideways. In the harsh airport lighting, she could see the sharp intelligence in his dark eyes, the way his mind processed information like a chess master calculating moves ahead. Something about his calm competence in the face of crisis reminded her of herself in the early days of building her company. Focused, strategic, unshakable. "You really think this is all coordinated?" "I know it is." Jonathan pulled up a timeline on his tablet. "Look at this." The video was posted to social media at 3:47 p.m. By 4:15, it had been shared by 12 verified accounts with over 1 million followers each. By 4:30, 3 separate news organizations had prepared background pieces on Montgomery Aviation. That's not organic viral spread. That's a coordinated amplification campaign. Diana felt her stomach drop. "You're saying Sterling had this planned?" "I'm saying someone with significant resources and political connections orchestrated a media assault designed to crater your stock price and force a fire sale of your company." Jonathan's fingers moved across the screen, pulling up network diagrams and social media analytics. "The question is whether Sterling is the architect or just another opportunist." Captain Fletcher appeared beside them, his face grim. "Federal marshals are waiting inside. They want to interview both you and Rachel about workplace discrimination patterns." Apparently, someone provided them with a list of former employees willing to testify about hostile work environments. Former employees. Diana's mind raced through recent departures. There hadn't been many. Her company had one of the lowest turnover rates in the industry. 12 people fired or laid off in the past 2 years, Fletcher continued. All claiming they can provide evidence of systemic discrimination. All represented by the same law firm. Jonathan's head snapped up. "What law firm?" "Sterling, Cov and Associates." The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. Diana felt the air leave her lungs as the full scope of the trap became visible. "Sterling's family law firm. They've been building a case against my company for months." "It's worse than that," Jonathan said, his voice tight with anger. "They've been creating the case. Reaching out to disgruntled former employees, coaching their testimony, building a narrative of discrimination to justify a federal investigation that would force you to sell." Diana's phone rang. Her assistant's name flashed on the screen with the emergency indicator. "Diana, where are you?" Sarah's voice was barely controlled panic. "The board meeting moved up. They are voting on the Sterling acquisition in 2 hours whether you're there or not. Richardson says if you don't accept the offer, he's pulling his investment and triggering the liquidation clause." The liquidation clause. Diana had forgotten about the fine print in Richardson's original investment. If the company's value dropped below a certain threshold due to management malfeasance, he could force an immediate sale of assets. He can't do that based on one incident. He can if there's a federal investigation for civil rights violations, Sarah interrupted. "Diana, they have 12 witnesses. They have your diversity reports showing you knew about problems. They have video evidence of employee discrimination. Richardson's lawyers say it's textbook corporate negligence." Diana closed her eyes, feeling the walls of the trap closing around her. Every decision she'd made, every report she'd commissioned, every attempt to improve her company's culture was being weaponized against her. "There's something else," Sarah continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Someone leaked your personal financial information to the press. They are reporting that you took out a personal loan secured against company assets to buy your grandmother's house back from foreclosure." The words hit Diana like ice water. That loan was private, personal, a promise she'd made to herself to restore the house where her grandmother had raised her, where she'd learned that dignity could never be purchased but had to be earned every single day. How did they get that information? I don't know, but it's everywhere. They are spinning it as you using company resources for personal gain while ignoring discrimination complaints. Diana felt Jonathan's hand on her arm, steadying her. The touch was brief, professional, but something about the warmth of human contact in the midst of this calculated destruction almost brought her to her knees. Diana, Sarah's voice was urgent. You need to get to New York. Now, if you're not in that boardroom to defend yourself. I'll be there, Diana said, ending the call. No, you won't. The voice came from behind them. Diana turned to see two federal marshals approaching, their badges gleaming under the terminal lights. Ms. Montgomery, we need you to come with us for questioning regarding workplace discrimination practices at Montgomery Aviation. She'll be happy to cooperate, Jonathan said smoothly, stepping forward, after she consults with her attorney. Federal questioning of this nature requires proper legal representation. And you are Dr. Jonathan Hayes, crisis management consultant retained by Montgomery Aviation. Jonathan produced a business card with practiced efficiency. I'm sure you understand that Ms. Montgomery needs to arrange legal counsel before any formal questioning. The lead marshal, a woman in her 40s with steel-gray hair, studied the card. Ms. Montgomery can arrange counsel after she answers some preliminary questions. This is a federal civil rights investigation. Diana felt the trap tightening around her. Every minute she spent in federal custody was another minute Sterling had to consolidate power, another hour for the board to vote without her, another day for the media to paint her as a fugitive from justice. How long? She asked. As long as it takes. Jonathan moved closer, and Diana caught the subtle scent of his cologne, something clean and understated that somehow cut through her panic. There might be another way, he said quietly. What kind of way? Trust me. Diana looked into his eyes and saw something that had been missing from her life for longer than she cared to admit. Someone who wasn't afraid of her success, who didn't see her company as something to be diminished or acquired, who understood that what was happening to her was bigger than business. I trust you. Jonathan turned to the marshals with a smile that was all diplomatic charm. Gentlemen, what if Ms. Montgomery were to cooperate fully with your investigation while also addressing the immediate crisis facing her company? A voluntary interview at your Boston field office, full disclosure of all relevant documents, complete cooperation, but conducted in a way that allows her to fulfill her legal obligations to her shareholders. The lead marshal frowned. What are you proposing? A video conference from your secure facility. Ms. Montgomery participates in her board meeting while simultaneously answering your questions. Full transparency for both proceedings. It was brilliant. Diana realized that Jonathan was offering something that looked like cooperation while actually creating a public record of the federal questioning, making it impossible for anyone to claim she was hiding from accountability while also ensuring the board meeting couldn't proceed without her. We'd need to review. Of course. Jonathan was already pulling out his phone. I'm calling Ms. Montgomery's legal team now. We can have everything arranged within the hour. As he spoke quietly into his phone, coordinating lawyers and logistics with the kind of efficiency that spoke of years of crisis management experience, Diana felt something unfamiliar settling in her chest. Not just gratitude, but something deeper. For 20 years, she'd fought every battle alone, trusted her own judgment above all else, built her empire through sheer force of will and refusal to depend on anyone. But watching Jonathan navigate the federal marshals while simultaneously texting what looked like media contacts and legal advisors, she realized she was seeing something she'd never experienced before, a true partner. Someone whose competence matched her own, whose strategic thinking complemented rather than competed with hers. Diana. Jonathan had finished his calls and moved close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. I need you to know something before we walk into that building. What? This isn't just about saving your company anymore. Sterling's attack on you is a test case. If he succeeds in using discrimination as a weapon to force hostile acquisitions, he'll do it again. To every successful woman, every person of color, everyone who threatens the old boys network. His voice was quiet but intense. You're not just fighting for Montgomery Aviation. You're fighting for whether people like us get to exist in corporate America. The weight of it crashed over her, not just her life's work at stake, but the future of everyone who would come after her. Every young woman watching this unfold, learning whether it was possible to build something that couldn't be taken away. So what do we do? Jonathan's smile was sharp as a blade. We show them that when you try to destroy a woman who's spent her life refusing to be diminished, you better make sure you kill her completely. Because if she survives, she's going to dismantle everything you used to attack her. Diana felt something ignite in her chest. Not just determination, but something fiercer. Looking at Jonathan, seeing the way he understood not just the tactics but the stakes, she realized that for the first time in her adult life, she wasn't facing the fight alone. The federal building loomed ahead of them, its glass facade reflecting the media circus that had gathered outside. Diana's phone buzzed with another crisis alert. Stock down 24%. Board meeting in 90 minutes. Congressional hearings announced. But walking beside Jonathan toward what might be the final battle for everything she'd built, Diana Montgomery felt something she hadn't experienced since the day she'd mortgaged her grandmother's house to buy her first plane. The electric thrill of going all in on a bet she absolutely had to win. The federal building's interrogation room felt like a tomb, windowless, sterile, designed to strip away every pretense and leave only truth. Diana sat across from Agent Rebecca Stone, a sharp-featured woman whose file folders seemed impossibly thick for an investigation that had begun hours ago. Jonathan sat beside Diana, his laptop open, managing the video conference with her board meeting in New York while simultaneously coordinating with her legal team. The split screen showed 12 board members in her Manhattan conference room, their faces ranging from sympathetic to openly hostile. "Ms. Montgomery," Agent Stone began, "let's start with your employee training protocols. Specifically, how Ms. Rachel Dale would have been instructed to handle passenger concerns. Our customer service training emphasizes respect and professionalism for all passengers," Diana replied, her eyes on the board meeting screen where Richardson was already presenting the sterling acquisition offer. "Discrimination based on race, gender, or perceived economic status is explicitly prohibited." Yet it happened. Yes. Agent Stone opened her folder, and Diana's heart stopped. Inside were dozens of photographs, surveillance images from airports, corporate events, even her own office building. Pictures of her getting into cars, entering restaurants, walking through her company headquarters. "Ms. Montgomery, we've been investigating Montgomery Aviation for considerably longer than you might realize." Diana felt Jonathan tense beside her. On the video screen, Richardson was explaining to the board how the federal investigation made Diana's continued leadership untenable. "How long?" Diana asked. 14 months. Agent Stone spread the photographs across the table like tarot cards predicting disaster. "We received credible reports of systemic discrimination, hostile work environment violations, and potential corporate fraud related to diversity reporting." 14 months. Diana's voice came out as a whisper. "But the incident on the plane just happened today." "The incident on the plane was the culmination of a much larger investigation." Agent Stone's smile was cold as winter. "Ms. Dale's interaction with you was being monitored in real time." The room seemed to tilt. Diana gripped the edge of the table, feeling Jonathan's hand find hers beneath the surface, a brief, warm touch that somehow made the revelation even more devastating. "You're saying you knew what was going to happen." "We're saying we were prepared for what we knew was inevitable, given the culture at your company." Agent Stone pulled out a tablet, showing a video that made Diana's blood freeze. It was Rachel Dale in what looked like a training facility, practicing the exact words she'd used on the plane. "We've been working with several of your employees to document discrimination patterns." Diana watched in horror as the video showed Rachel rehearsing different scenarios, each one designed to humiliate a passenger while creating legal liability for the company. In the background, barely visible, was a man Diana recognized, Victor Webb, her head of HR. "Victor." The name came out strangled. "Mr. Webb has been cooperating with our investigation for over a year," Agent Stone continued. "He's provided extensive documentation of discrimination complaints that were allegedly suppressed, diversity training that was allegedly inadequate, and hiring practices that allegedly violated federal guidelines." On the video conference screen, Diana could see her board members reacting to something Richardson was showing them. Probably the same evidence Agent Stone was revealing. Board member Sarah Dale, no relation to Rachel, was shaking her head in dismay. Dylan Wu looked like he'd been physically struck. "This is impossible," Diana said. "Victor has been with my company for 8 years. He's helped implement every diversity initiative Every initiative you've implemented has been carefully documented as inadequate and potentially fraudulent," Agent Stone interrupted. "According to our investigation, Your company has been systematically covering up discrimination complaints while presenting false diversity metrics to investors and federal contractors. Diana felt the world fracturing around her. Victor had been one of her first hires, someone she'd trusted with her company's most sensitive personnel matters. If he'd been working with federal investigators for over a year. Every conversation I had with him about improving our diversity programs, she said slowly, every report he gave me, every recommendation he made, was being shared with federal investigators as evidence of your knowledge of ongoing violations. Agent Stone's voice was clinically precise. You've been building your own prosecution case, Ms. Montgomery. Jonathan's hand tightened on hers, and she turned to look at him. Something in his expression, a flicker of knowledge, a moment of what looked like guilt, made her stomach drop. Diana, Jonathan said quietly, there's something I need to tell you. No, not him. Not now. Dr. Hayes. Agent Stone's tone carried a note of recognition that made Diana's skin crawl. I believe you have some additional context to provide. Jonathan closed his laptop, ending the video conference that would determine the fate of her company. Diana, I'm not just a crisis management consultant. The words landed like physical blows. Diana pulled her hand away from his, pressing back against her chair as if distance could protect her from whatever was coming. I'm an undercover federal investigator. I've been embedded in corporate consulting for 3 years, investigating systemic discrimination in the aviation industry. The room went silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights that suddenly sounded like screaming. Diana stared at Jonathan, at the man whose competence had impressed her, whose strategic thinking had complemented hers, whose touch had made her feel less alone for the first time in years. You knew, she whispered. On the plane, when you approached me, you knew exactly what was happening. Diana. You knew Rachel was going to target me. You knew about the investigation. You knew about Victor. Her voice was rising despite her efforts to control it. You've been watching me for months, documenting every decision I made, every conversation I had, every attempt I made to improve my company. Jonathan's face was anguished. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. You weren't supposed to be on that flight. When I saw Rachel approaching you, I tried to stop it, but you decided to use it instead. Diana felt something cold and final settling in her chest. You decided to position yourself as my savior while actually collecting evidence for my prosecution. No, Diana, listen to me. Listen to you. Diana stood so violently her chair scraped against the floor. Every moment of connection we've shared, every strategic insight you've provided, every time you've touched me, it's all been part of an investigation designed to destroy everything I've built. Agent Stone was watching this exchange with the detached interest of a scientist observing a reaction. Dr. Hayes has been instrumental in documenting the corporate culture at Montgomery Aviation. His recordings of your conversations today have been particularly illuminating. Recordings. Diana felt the last of her defenses crumble. You've been recording our conversations. Jonathan's silence was answer enough. The crisis management advice, the strategic planning, the way you made me feel like I wasn't fighting alone. Diana's voice broke despite her efforts to maintain control. It was all lies. My feelings for you aren't lies, Jonathan said desperately. Diana, what I feel when I'm with you is irrelevant. Diana's voice had gone flat, empty. Your job was to make me trust you so I'd incriminate myself. Mission accomplished. She turned to Agent Stone. How much of my company's destruction was actually planned by the federal government? We don't plan corporate failures, Ms. Montgomery. We simply document when they occur. That's not an answer. Agent Stone closed her folder. The Sterling Industries acquisition offer was not coordinated with our investigation. Their timing appears to be purely opportunistic. Appears to be. We have no evidence of coordination between federal investigators and Sterling Industries. Diana looked between Agent Stone and Jonathan, understanding the careful language being used. No evidence didn't mean no coordination. It just meant they were too smart to leave proof. So Sterling wasn't working with you, but somehow they knew exactly when to attack. Somehow they had inside information about my company's vulnerabilities. Somehow they were prepared with a full acquisition offer within hours of a federal investigation becoming public. Neither agent responded. Diana's phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. Board voted. Sterling acquisition approved 8-4. You have 24 hours to respond before hostile takeover proceedings begin. I'm sorry. 20 years of building, fighting, proving herself, gone in a single day. Her company, her employees, her legacy, all being handed over to the man who'd sat smugly in first class waiting for her humiliation to become his opportunity. She looked at Jonathan one last time, this man who'd made her feel understood and supported while systematically dismantling everything she'd worked for. I loved my grandmother's house because it was the only place I ever felt safe. The only place where my worth wasn't being calculated and measured and found wanting. Her voice was steady now, carved from stone. You've taken that away from me too. Diana, please. No. Diana gathered what remained of her dignity around her like armor. You want to know about discrimination, Agent Stone. Here's your data point. You've just watched a black woman's life's work be destroyed by a coordinated attack that used her race as a weapon, her success as evidence of fraud, and her trust as a tool of her own destruction. She turned toward the door. When you write your report about corporate culture, remember that the real discrimination isn't what happened on that plane. It's what happened in this room. Outside the federal building, the media circus was in full swing. Diana could see the headlines scrolling across phone screens. Montgomery Aviation CEO under federal investigation. Board approves Sterling acquisition. Discrimination scandal brings down aviation empire. For the first time since she'd boarded that plane in New York, Diana Montgomery was completely alone. No company, no allies, no one to trust. The woman who'd built an empire through sheer force of will now stood on a Boston sidewalk with nothing but the clothes on her back and the devastating knowledge that even her moments of deepest connection had been lies designed to destroy her. But as she stood there watching her world burn, Diana felt something unexpected stirring in her chest. Not despair, not defeat. Rage. Pure, crystalline, unstoppable rage. They thought they'd destroyed her. They had no idea what they'd actually done was set her free. The rain started as Diana walked away from the federal building, each drop feeling like another piece of her life dissolving. She had nowhere to go. Her corporate credit cards had been frozen pending investigation. Her company car had been impounded as evidence, and her personal accounts were likely being scrutinized by forensic accountants who would turn every coffee purchase into evidence of corporate malfeasance. She found herself in a 24-hour diner 6 blocks from the federal building, staring at a cup of coffee she couldn't afford and a phone that wouldn't stop ringing with calls from reporters, lawyers, and vultures circling the wreckage of Montgomery Aviation. Diana Montgomery. She looked up to see Dorothy Williams sliding into the booth across from her. The elderly woman from the plane looked exactly as she had hours ago, dignified, composed, carrying herself with the quiet strength that only comes from surviving decades of battles. Mrs. Williams. Diana's voice sounded hollow to her own ears. How did you find me? Honey, I've been where you are right now. Sometimes you just know where to look. Dorothy signaled the waitress for coffee. I read about the board vote. I'm sorry. Diana stared at her hands wrapped around the coffee cup. 20 years. I gave 20 years of my life to building something that mattered. And in one day, it's just gone. Tell me what happened in there. The story spilled out of Diana like blood from a wound. Jonathan's betrayal, Victor's year-long deception, the revelation that her every attempt to improve her company had been twisted into evidence of guilt. Dorothy listened without judgment, her weathered hands steady around her coffee cup. That boy on the plane, Dorothy said when Diana finished. The one helping you. He was working against you the whole time. Every moment of connection was manufactured. Every strategic insight was designed to make me incriminate myself. Every time he touched me. Diana's voice cracked. I thought I'd finally found someone who understood what it meant to build something from nothing. Instead, I found someone whose job was to watch me lose everything. Dorothy was quiet for a long moment. You know what the worst part about betrayal is? It makes you doubt your own judgment. Makes you think maybe you deserved it. Diana's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Check your email. Time sensitive. JH. Don't. Dorothy's voice was sharp. Whatever he wants, don't give him the satisfaction. But Diana was already opening her email, her finger moving without conscious thought. The message contained a single video file with no explanation. Against every instinct, she clicked play. The video showed Sterling Industries' corporate boardroom from what looked like a security camera angle. David Sterling sat at the head of a polished conference table, surrounded by men in expensive suits. The timestamp showed it was recorded 3 days ago, before Diana had ever boarded that plane. Gentlemen, Sterling's voice came through her phone's tiny speaker. Phase 1 is complete. Our federal contacts confirm Montgomery is under investigation. The Dale asset is in position for tomorrow's flight. Webb has provided the documentation we need to demonstrate systemic discrimination. Diana felt the blood drain from her face. On screen, Sterling was pointing to a presentation slide titled Montgomery Aviation Acquisition Timeline. Phase 2 begins once the discrimination incident goes viral. Our media contacts will ensure maximum coverage. The congressional investigation will be announced within 6 hours. Stock manipulation through coordinated selling will drive down value by at least 20%. One of the men leaned forward. And if Montgomery doesn't sell voluntarily? Phase 3. Sterling's smile was predatory. We foreclose on her personal assets. The house, the memorabilia, everything she's used as collateral. We destroy her completely, then acquire the company assets at liquidation prices. The video ended. Diana stared at the black screen, her mind struggling to process what she'd just seen. They planned everything. The investigation, the timing, even Rachel's behavior. It was all coordinated. That boy sent you this? Dorothy asked. Jonathan. Diana's hands were shaking. But why would he, if he's working with them? Her phone rang. Jonathan's number. Don't answer, Dorothy warned. Diana answered anyway. What do you want? Diana, listen to me carefully. Jonathan's voice was tight with urgency. You need to get out of Boston. Now. Sterling has people watching you, and they are planning something tonight. Planning what? Your grandmother's house. They are going to foreclose on it and claim you used company funds to prevent it. They have falsified documents showing illegal transfers from Montgomery Aviation to cover your personal debts. Diana felt the world tilt. That's impossible. I used my own money. Money you borrowed against company stock, which they are claiming constitutes corporate fraud. Diana, they are going to take the house tonight and arrest you for embezzlement in the morning. The house. The one place in the world that had ever felt like home, where her grandmother had raised her, where she'd learned that dignity was something no one could take from you, where she'd planned to retreat and figure out how to rebuild her life. Why are you telling me this? Because I never meant for it to go this far. Because watching them destroy you is destroying me. Jonathan's voice was raw. Because I've fallen in love with you, and that wasn't supposed to happen. Love. Diana's laugh was bitter. You've been lying to me since the moment we met. Not about everything. Not about what I feel when I look at you. Not about believing you deserve better than what they are doing to you. Dorothy was watching Diana's face, her expression unreadable. Even if I believed you, Diana said, what difference does it make? They've taken my company, my reputation, my future. Now they are taking my grandmother's house. I have nothing left to fight with. You have something they can't take. What? The truth. And proof that they orchestrated all of this. Diana closed her eyes. The video you sent me won't be admissible in court. It was probably illegally obtained. Not that video. I have recordings of Sterling coordinating with federal officials, financial documents showing the stock manipulation, communications proving the media campaign was paid for. Jonathan's voice was intense. Diana, I was embedded to investigate Sterling as much as the aviation industry. They are running illegal acquisition schemes across multiple sectors. Then why didn't you stop this? Because my superiors wanted to let it play out to get evidence of the full conspiracy. They were willing to sacrifice your company to build a case against Sterling. And you went along with it. Until I met you. The pain in his voice sounded real, but Diana had learned not to trust her judgment about Jonathan Hayes. Until I watched you handle that discrimination with such dignity. Until I realized what kind of person they were destroying. Diana looked across the table at Dorothy, who was listening to every word with the sharp attention of someone who'd seen too much of the world to be easily fooled. What are you proposing? Diana asked. Help me take down Sterling. Not just for your company, but for every person he's done this to, every company he's destroyed using discrimination as a weapon. In exchange for what? Your company back. Your reputation restored. Sterling in prison where he belongs. Diana felt something crack in her chest. For a moment, the possibility of justice, of redemption, of everything being restored, dangled in front of her like a lifeline. Then reality crashed back in. Even if you're telling the truth now, even if you have evidence, even if Sterling goes down, what happens to us? Her voice was quiet, deadly. How do I ever trust someone who's been recording my most vulnerable moments? How do I ever believe that what you feel for me is real when your job was to manipulate my emotions? The silence stretched between them like a chasm. You can't, Jonathan said finally. and I'll have to live with that for the rest of my life. Diana ended the call and set her phone down on the scratched formica table. Outside, the rain had intensified, turning the diner's windows into rivers of distortion. "What are you going to do?" Dorothy asked. Diana thought about her grandmother's house, about the compass pendant around her neck, about the 20 years she'd spent building something that mattered, about the employees who depended on her, about the young women watching to see if someone like her could survive something like this. "I'm going to make a choice that will either save everything or destroy what little I have left." She pulled out her phone and dialed a number she'd memorized but never called. "David Sterling. This is Diana Montgomery. I want to meet." Sterling's laugh was warm, victorious. "Diana, I heard about your unfortunate day. I hope you're calling to discuss our generous acquisition offer." "I'm calling to surrender," Diana said, the words tasting like ash. "You win. I'll sign over Montgomery Aviation for whatever terms you want. Just leave my grandmother's house alone." "Diana, I'm sorry, but the house is part of the corporate fraud investigation now. My hands are tied." "Please." The word came out broken. "I'll give you everything else. The company, my reputation, my future. Just let me keep the one place that means something to me." "I'll tell you what," Sterling said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Meet me at the house tonight. We'll discuss terms for a comprehensive resolution. Perhaps we can work something out." Diana closed her eyes, knowing she was walking into a trap but seeing no other choice. "What time?" "Midnight. And Diana, come alone. This is between us now." After she hung up, Dorothy reached across the table and took Diana's hand. "Honey, you know that man isn't going to let you keep anything." "I know. So why are you going?" Diana looked out at the rain-soaked streets of Boston, thinking about dignity and justice and the difference between surrender and sacrifice. Because sometimes the only way to win is to let them think they've destroyed you completely. And then, Diana's smile was sharp as broken glass. Then you show them what a woman with nothing left to lose is actually capable of. Midnight at her grandmother's house felt like standing in a graveyard of dreams. Diana sat on the front porch steps where she'd learned to read, where her grandmother had taught her that a person's worth wasn't measured by what others thought of them but by what they knew to be true about themselves. The house looked smaller than she remembered, more fragile, like it might crumble under the weight of everything she was about to lose. 3 black SUVs pulled up to the curb with military precision. Sterling emerged from the center vehicle, flanked by men who looked more like enforcers than lawyers. In the streetlight, his smile was all predator. "Diana, you look tired." She stood slowly, every movement deliberate. "Let's get this over with." Sterling approached the porch but didn't climb the steps, maintaining the psychological advantage of forcing her to look down at him. "I have to admit, I'm impressed. Most people in your situation would be crying, begging, making threats. But here you are, ready to negotiate like a professional. What do you want me to sign?" "Straight to business." "I like that." Sterling nodded to one of his men, who handed him a thick folder. "Complete transfer of Montgomery Aviation assets to Sterling Industries. Personal bankruptcy filing acknowledging fraudulent use of corporate funds. And a signed confession that you systematically covered up discrimination in your company." Diana's hands remained steady as she took the papers. "And in exchange, you avoid federal prison. Your employees keep their jobs under Sterling management. And," Sterling's pause was theatrical, "I allow you to rent this house from me at market rates." "Rent? Oh, Diana, you didn't think I was going to let you keep it, did you?" Sterling's laugh was crystalline cruelty. "This house is collateral for the fraudulent loans you took out. It belongs to me now. But I'm a generous man. I'll let you stay as a tenant. Consider it a mercy." Diana felt something snap inside her chest. Not break, snap into place, like a weapon being cocked. "So even if I give you everything, you still take the one thing that matters most to me." "That's the point." Sterling climbed the first step, bringing them closer to eye level. "I don't just want your company, Diana. I want your complete destruction. I want every young black woman who thinks she can build an empire to see what happens when they get too ambitious." The mask was completely off now. This wasn't about business, it was about sending a message that success, for people like her, would always be temporary, always vulnerable, always subject to the whims of men like David Sterling. "You know what the beautiful thing is?" Sterling continued. "Even if someone tried to investigate what happened to you, they'd find a federal investigation, legitimate discrimination complaints, proper corporate procedures. Everything perfectly legal. Except for the part where you coordinated with federal agents to manufacture evidence. Sterling's smile faltered slightly. I have no idea what you're talking about. The video Jonathan sent me. Your boardroom meeting 3 days ago, planning my destruction in detail. Even if such a video existed, which it doesn't, it would be inadmissible. Illegally obtained evidence. Sterling's confidence returned. Your boy Jonathan has been feeding you lies to salve his conscience. Did you really think a federal agent was going to throw away his career for a discrimination case? Diana's phone buzzed. A text from Jonathan. Don't sign anything. Help is coming. She deleted it without responding. Smart, Sterling said, having seen the exchange. Because there is no help coming. Your board has voted, your company is mine, and your federal protector has already moved on to his next assignment. Diana looked at the papers in her hands. 20 years of building reduced to corporate transfer documents and admissions of guilt. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. Sometimes the only choice is between your dignity and your survival. Choose carefully, because you'll have to live with either one. Where do I sign? Sterling's triumph was visible, physical, like watching someone devour a victory feast. Page 12, page 18, and page 24. Diana flipped to page 12 and raised the pen Sterling offered her. Her hand hovered over the signature line, and for a moment she could see her entire future. Working for someone else, renting her grandmother's house from the man who'd destroyed her, watching every young woman of color learn that success was just another form of vulnerability. Having second thoughts, Sterling asked, "Just one?" Diana signed her name with a flourish. Then she flipped to page 18 and signed again. Page 24, signed. Excellent. Sterling took the papers like he was accepting a crown. Diana Montgomery, you are officially. The first FBI van arrived without sirens, followed immediately by 3 others. Agents poured onto the quiet street with tactical precision, their badges gleaming under the streetlights. David Sterling, a voice called from the lead van. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit securities fraud, bribery of federal officials, and violation of civil rights under color of law. Diana felt her knees give out, catching herself on the porch railing. Through the chaos of agents and shouted instructions, she saw Jonathan emerging from the passenger seat of the lead van, his face grim with purpose. This is impossible, Sterling was saying as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. I have federal immunity. I was working with your people. Mr. Sterling, said the lead agent, a stern-faced woman Diana didn't recognize. We've been investigating you for 18 months. Every conversation with federal officials was recorded with their cooperation. Every bribe was documented. Every illegal acquisition was traced. Diana stared at Jonathan as he approached the porch. You knew this was going to happen. I told you help was coming. But the signatures, I just signed over everything. Jonathan held up a small device. Voice-activated recording. Everything Sterling just said about wanting your complete destruction, about sending a message to ambitious black women, about coordinating with federal agents, all recorded and admissible. Diana felt the world reshaping itself around her. The papers I signed. Worthless. You can't legally transfer assets while under duress, and Sterling's threats constitute clear duress. Jonathan's voice was gentle. Diana, your company was never really lost. The board vote was based on false information that we now have evidence was planted by Sterling. Once this comes out, the vote will be invalidated. And my grandmother's house. The foreclosure documents were forged. Sterling never actually had legal claim to the property. Diana sank onto the porch steps, watching Sterling being loaded into a federal van while agents seized boxes of evidence from his vehicles. The night that had begun with her surrender was ending with her enemy's destruction. Why? She asked Jonathan. Why save me after everything that's happened? Jonathan sat beside her on the steps, maintaining careful distance. Because watching you fight for your dignity even when you thought you'd lost everything showed me what real courage looks like. Because seeing Sterling try to destroy you made me understand that some things are more important than following orders. Your career. My career was always supposed to be about stopping people like Sterling. It took meeting you to remember that. Diana looked at this man who'd betrayed her, saved her, lied to her, and sacrificed his professional future for her. Where does this leave us? I don't know. Jonathan's honesty was raw, painful. I can't undo the deception. I can't take back the recordings I made of your private moments. I can't change the fact that everything between us started with lies. But But what I feel for you is real. The respect I have for what you've built is real. The way you handle adversity with such grace, that's real. Jonathan turned to face her fully. I know I have no right to ask this, but would you consider giving us a chance to start over? With complete honesty this time. Diana studied his face in the streetlight. The angles were the same, the intelligence in his dark eyes unchanged, but something fundamental had shifted. The federal agent was gone, replaced by a man who'd chosen love over duty, justice over career advancement. Starting over would mean trusting you again, she said quietly. I know. It would mean believing that someone who's trained to manipulate emotions can actually feel them. I know. It would mean risking my heart with someone who's already broken it once. Jonathan's voice was barely a whisper. I know. Diana thought about her grandmother, who'd loved a man who'd left her to raise their daughter alone, who'd chosen to trust love again with Diana's grandfather and built a marriage that lasted 40 years. About courage and calculated risks and the difference between wisdom and fear. Jonathan. Yeah. Ask me again in 6 months. When my company is stable and Sterling is convicted and we've both had time to figure out who we are when we're not in crisis. Jonathan's smile was brilliant and heartbreaking. That's the most hopeful rejection I've ever received. It's not a rejection. Diana stood, brushing off her grandmother's skirt. It's a strategic delay while I decide whether loving you is worth the risk of trusting you. As federal agents finished processing the scene and Sterling's vehicles disappeared into the night, Diana Montgomery stood on her grandmother's porch and felt something she hadn't experienced in 20 years. The possibility that she might not have to fight every battle alone. The impossible choice hadn't been whether to sign the papers or fight Sterling. It had been whether to trust Jonathan despite his betrayal, whether to believe in the possibility of love despite the certainty of risk. She'd chosen hope. And for the first time since boarding that plane in New York, Diana Montgomery felt like she might actually win. 6 weeks later, Diana sat in her restored corner office, looking out at the Manhattan skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows that had never felt like prison bars. The view was the same, but everything else had changed. The discrimination scandal that was supposed to destroy Montgomery Aviation had instead become a catalyst for the most comprehensive civil rights investigation in corporate America's recent history. Sterling Industries had collapsed in spectacular fashion. David Sterling himself sat in federal prison awaiting trial on 17 counts of conspiracy, fraud, and civil rights violations. But more importantly, his downfall had exposed a network of similar schemes targeting successful minority-owned businesses across 6 industries. Ms. Montgomery, her new assistant, hired to replace the entire HR department that had been compromised, knocked on her office door. Mrs. Williams is here for your meeting. Diana smiled. Dorothy Williams had become an unexpected mentor over the past month, offering wisdom on everything from media strategy to corporate governance. The elderly woman had requested this meeting to discuss the future of Montgomery Aviation, and Diana was curious about what insights she might offer. Dorothy entered with the same dignified bearing she'd shown on the airplane, but something about her presence seemed to fill the office in a way Diana hadn't noticed before. She wore a simple navy suit and carried a leather portfolio that looked expensive but understated. Dorothy, thank you for coming. I have to say, your advice about handling the congressional testimony was invaluable. I've had some experience with congressional hearings, Dorothy replied with a slight smile. More than you might expect. They settled into the conference area of Diana's office, and Dorothy opened her portfolio with deliberate care. Diana, I think it's time I was completely honest with you about who I am and why I was on that plane. Diana felt a familiar flutter of unease. After everything that had happened with Jonathan, with Victor, with the web of deception that had nearly destroyed her company, she'd learned to be wary of revelations. I wasn't just a passenger traveling to London, Dorothy continued. I was traveling to meet with you. With me. But we'd never met. Actually, we had. 21 years ago, when you were a recent college graduate working 3 jobs and trying to get a business loan that no bank would approve. Diana's breath caught. That's impossible. I remember everyone from those days, including the anonymous investor who provided your seed funding. Dorothy's smile was gentle but knowing. The one who believed in a young woman's dream of building an aviation company. The world seemed to tilt. Diana gripped the arms of her chair, staring at Dorothy with new understanding flooding through her like cold water. Your DW Enterprises. Dorothy Williams. I've been using my initials for business purposes since 1963, when being a black woman investor was even more challenging than it is today. Diana felt her mouth open without sound emerging. DW Enterprises had been the mysterious angel investor who'd provided her initial $2 million when every bank, every traditional investor, every venture capital firm had turned her down. For 20 years, she'd received quarterly reports and dividend payments, but she'd never known who was behind the company. You've been my silent partner for 2 decades. More than that. Dorothy pulled out a thick document from her portfolio. I've been watching your progress, Diana. Watching you build something extraordinary, something that proved what I'd believed when I first met you, that you had the vision and the strength to change an entire industry. Diana's hands were shaking as she accepted the document. The letterhead read Williams Capital Management and showed assets under management of $3.2 billion. You're not just an investor, Diana whispered. You're one of the largest minority-owned investment firms in the country, Dorothy finished. I've spent 60 years building a portfolio of companies owned by women and people of color. Companies that traditional investors overlook or undervalue. Companies like yours. The implications crashed over Diana like a tsunami. The plane. You weren't traveling by chance. I was coming to warn you. My intelligence network had picked up rumors about Sterling's plans. I booked the same flight to observe the situation firsthand and determine how to best protect my investment. Dorothy's expression grew stern. I never imagined I'd witness such blatant discrimination, or that it would become the catalyst for exposing Sterling's entire operation. Diana thought back to that moment on the plane when Dorothy had stood up to defend her, when an elderly stranger had risked social comfort to speak truth to racism. But you could have just called. You could have sent a representative. Why put yourself through that? Because some battles require personal presence. Because witnessing injustice and doing nothing makes you complicit. Dorothy's voice carried the weight of decades of similar fights. And because I wanted to see how you handled adversity when you thought you had nothing left to lose. It was a test. Everything is a test, Diana. The question is whether we rise to meet the moment or let it diminish us. Diana looked at the documents in her hands. Corporate structures, investment portfolios, the hidden architecture of support that had made her success possible. I built this company thinking I was alone. Fighting every battle by myself, proving I didn't need anyone's help. You did build it alone, Dorothy said firmly. I provided capital, nothing more. Every decision, every strategy, every moment of courage that brought you to this point, that was all you. I just made sure you had the resources to fight. But why? Why me? Dorothy's smile carried memories of decades past. Because 21 years ago, a young woman walked into my office with a business plan that was audacious, brilliant, and completely terrifying to every traditional investor in America. She wanted to build an aviation company that prioritized safety and dignity for all passengers, that hired based on competence rather than connections, that proved excellence knows no color or gender. Diana remembered that meeting, the desperation, the rehearsed pitch, the crushing moment when she'd realized even this investor was going to say no. You turned me down, Diana said quietly. No, I didn't. I told you that your plan was too conservative. Dorothy's eyes sparkled with the memory. I said if you were going to revolutionize an industry, you needed to think bigger. Much bigger. The memory crystallized with painful clarity. The older woman in the elegant suit who'd listened to Diana's pitch for a small charter service and said, "Why are you thinking so small? Why not build something that changes everything?" I went back and rewrote the entire business plan, Diana said slowly. Into the blueprint for Montgomery Aviation. The company that didn't just serve wealthy passengers, but created new markets, new standards, new possibilities. Dorothy leaned forward. That's when I knew you were ready for real support. Diana felt tears threatening for the first time since the night at her grandmother's house. You've been watching over me for 20 years. I've been investing in the future. In proving that excellence and integrity can triumph over discrimination and corruption. Dorothy's voice grew passionate. Sterling's attack on you wasn't just corporate warfare. It was an assault on everything we've built. Every woman of color who's dared to dream beyond the limitations others set for her. The federal investigation was already underway, but it needed a catalyst. Your dignity in the face of discrimination, your refusal to be diminished, your fight to keep your company, that became the symbol that gave people courage to come forward with their own stories. Diana looked out her office window at the city where she'd built her empire, understanding for the first time that she'd never been fighting alone. How many others? Companies? 237 businesses across 12 industries. Women and minority entrepreneurs who needed capital and got wisdom instead of exploitation. Dorothy's pride was evident. Diana, you're not just the CEO of Montgomery Aviation. You're proof of concept for an entirely different way of building wealth and power in America. And Jonathan. Dorothy's expression grew complex. Dr. Hayes was genuinely undercover, genuinely conflicted, and genuinely in love with you. I had nothing to do with his assignment or his choices. But, she paused meaningfully. But, I may have made some calls to ensure his evidence against Sterling was properly received by the right people at the right time. Diana laughed despite herself. You orchestrated Sterling's downfall. I ensured justice was served. There's a difference. Dorothy's smile was sharp as a blade. Men like Sterling have been using discrimination as a weapon for generations. It was time someone used their own tactics against them. A knock on the office door interrupted them. Diana's assistant appeared with an apologetic expression. Ms. Montgomery, Dr. Hayes is here. He says he has an appointment. Diana looked at Dorothy, who was gathering her papers with obvious amusement. Did you? I may have suggested he stop by today. You've been strategically delaying his pursuit for 6 weeks. I thought it was time for a resolution. Jonathan appeared in the doorway, wearing jeans and a button-down shirt that made him look younger, less federal agent and more like the man she'd glimpsed beneath the professional facade. His eyes went immediately to Dorothy with obvious recognition. Mrs. Williams. Dr. Hayes. Dorothy stood, extending her hand. I trust your new position with the Justice Department's Corporate Crime Division is treating you well. Better than I deserve, considering. Jonathan's eyes found Diana's. Thank you for making the call that saved my career. Diana looked between them. You two know each other. Dr. Hayes reached out to me after Sterling's arrest, Dorothy explained. He was facing disciplinary action for his unauthorized actions during the investigation. I testified on his behalf to the review board. You testified about the importance of agents who choose justice over bureaucracy, about the value of people who risk their careers to do what's right. Dorothy moved toward the door. Diana, I'll leave you two to discuss the future. We can continue our conversation later. After Dorothy left, Diana and Jonathan stood facing each other across her office, the Manhattan skyline sprawling between them like a bridge of possibilities. 6 weeks, Jonathan said quietly. 6 weeks. Your company is stronger than ever. Sterling is facing life in prison. The congressional hearings have led to industry-wide reforms. You've become a symbol of resistance to corporate discrimination. Jonathan stepped closer. How do you feel? Like I've been living someone else's life for 20 years, Diana said honestly. Thinking I was building something alone when I actually had the most powerful mentor in America watching over me. Thinking I was fighting unique battles when I was part of a movement I didn't even know existed. And now that you know. Diana looked at this man who'd lied to her, betrayed her, sacrificed his career for her, and somehow earned Dorothy Williams' respect in the process. Now I'm wondering if maybe it's time to stop being afraid of needing people. Jonathan's smile was careful, hopeful. What does that mean for us? It means I've spent 6 weeks thinking about trust and risk and whether loving someone is worth the possibility of being hurt again. Diana moved closer to him, close enough to see the gold flecks in his brown eyes. And I've decided that a life without risk is just another kind of prison. Diana. It means yes, Jonathan. Yes to starting over. Yes to building something together. Yes to trusting that what we feel for each other is real. She reached up to touch his face. But it also means no more lies. No more recordings. No more investigating me or my company or anything else connected to my life. I promise. And it means understanding that I'm not just Diana Montgomery anymore. I'm part of something bigger, something Dorothy has been building for 60 years. Are you ready for that? Jonathan's kiss was his answer, gentle, grateful, full of the kind of hope that comes from being forgiven for unforgivable things. Outside Diana's office window, the sun was setting over Manhattan, casting the city in golden light that made everything look possible. Somewhere in federal prison, David Sterling was learning that trying to destroy a woman who'd built her empire on dignity and determination was the worst miscalculation of his life. And in a corner office overlooking the city where dreams were made and broken daily, Diana Montgomery was learning that sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving you can survive alone. It's discovering you were never alone to begin with. 1 year later, Diana stood at the front of the first-class cabin of Montgomery Aviation's newest aircraft, a state-of-the-art Boeing 787 designed with the most comprehensive accessibility and dignity standards in commercial aviation history. She was addressing a cabin full of corporate leaders, federal officials, and civil rights advocates who had gathered for the inaugural flight of what the media had dubbed the Dignity Express. "Before we take off," Diana continued, "I want to share something with you. Exactly 1 year ago, in this same cabin configuration, I was told I didn't belong in first class. That my presence was making other passengers uncomfortable. That perhaps I should consider moving to coach where it would be more appropriate." The cabin had gone completely silent. The person who said those words was Rachel Dale, a flight attendant who had been coached by a network of corporate predators to use discrimination as a weapon. Rachel was fired that day, and she deserved to be. But today, she's also here with us. Diana gestured toward the galley, where Rachel emerged wearing the navy blue uniform of Montgomery Aviation's new customer dignity training program. The woman looked transformed, her posture confident but humble, her face reflecting a year of serious introspection and education. Rachel spent the past year in intensive training, not just in customer service, but in confronting the unconscious biases that made her actions possible. She studied the history of discrimination in aviation, worked with civil rights organizations, and underwent psychological counseling to understand how she had been manipulated into becoming a tool of corporate warfare. Rachel stepped forward, her voice clear but weighted with genuine remorse. "Ms. Montgomery, I know that apologizing can't undo the harm I caused, but I want everyone here to understand that my actions were my choice, regardless of the manipulation. I chose to see your success as suspicious instead of celebrating it. I chose to question your presence instead of honoring it." She paused, gathering strength. "I've spent a year learning how to be better, and I'll spend the rest of my career proving that people can change if they are willing to do the work." The applause that followed was different from before, not celebratory, but respectful. The sound of people witnessing genuine accountability and growth. "Rachel now leads our employee education program," Diana continued, "helping other staff members recognize and counter the kind of systematic manipulation that nearly destroyed both our lives. Because the real enemy was never individual prejudice, it was the organized effort to weaponize that prejudice for corporate gain." Captain Fletcher's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been cleared for takeoff. Please prepare for departure to our destination, London, where Ms. Montgomery will be addressing the International Aviation Safety Council about implementing dignity standards worldwide." As the plane began to taxi, Diana took her seat next to Dorothy in first class. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. The same seats where the crisis had begun were now the foundation for a new beginning. "You know," Dorothy said quietly as the aircraft lifted off, "I've been flying for 60 years, and this is the first time I've ever felt completely safe in first class. Safe. Safe to be excellent without apology. Safe to succeed without expecting attack. Safe to take up space without justifying my presence." Dorothy's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "That's what you've built, Diana. Not just a better airline, but proof that we can create spaces where dignity isn't a privilege, it's a guarantee." Diana felt her throat tighten with emotion. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." "You could have," Dorothy said firmly, "but you didn't have to. That's the difference between the old way and the new way of building power." Jonathan appeared in the aisle beside them, having finished his interviews with the federal officials aboard. "Mind if I join the celebration?" Diana smiled, gesturing to the empty seat across from them. Over the past year, their relationship had developed the deep roots that only grow when two people choose each other every day despite knowing each other's worst moments. There had been therapy, difficult conversations, and the slow work of rebuilding trust. But there had also been laughter, shared dreams, and the discovery that love could be stronger than the lies that had nearly destroyed it. "I got the preliminary numbers from the Justice Department," Jonathan said, settling into his seat. "The Sterling investigation has led to indictments in 4 to 7 companies across 12 industries. The corporate ethics reforms have prevented an estimated 230 hostile takeovers that were using discrimination as leverage. And Sterling himself. 25 years. No possibility of parole." Jonathan's satisfaction was visible. His entire network has been dismantled. The era of using civil rights violations as corporate warfare tactics is over. Diana looked out the window at the Manhattan skyline shrinking below them, thinking about the young woman who had mortgaged her grandmother's house to buy her first plane. That woman had been fighting for the right to exist in spaces that weren't designed for her. This woman, The one sitting in first class surrounded by allies and partners and proof that change was possible, was fighting for the right of those spaces to become something better. What's next? Dorothy asked, as if reading her thoughts. The International Standards Proposal. The congressional testimony next month. The documentary about corporate discrimination that comes out in the fall. Diana enumerated the battles ahead with the calm confidence of someone who no longer fought alone. And then Jonathan and I are taking a real vacation. No federal investigations, no corporate crises, no media interviews. Just us, Jonathan added, reaching for her hand. Figuring out what normal people do when they're not saving each other from destruction. Normal is overrated, Dorothy said with a laugh. But love is worth every fight you've had to get here. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Diana thought about the compass pendant at her throat, her grandmother's gift that had guided her through every moment of doubt. True north hadn't been a direction. It had been the courage to remain herself even when the world demanded she be smaller, quieter, less ambitious. Her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. 3 more companies have adopted the Montgomery standards for workplace dignity. The ripple effect continues. The ripple effect. Diana smiled, understanding finally that her story had never been just about building a successful business. It had been about proving that success built on dignity and integrity could survive any attack, inspire any change, create any future they were brave enough to imagine. Somewhere below them, in boardrooms and corporate offices and employee training sessions across America, people were learning that discrimination wasn't just morally wrong, it was strategically stupid. That excellence knew no color or gender. That the future belonged to organizations brave enough to value human dignity over traditional power structures. And at 30,000 feet above the Atlantic, flying toward a future she was helping to create, Diana Montgomery finally understood what her grandmother had always known. Sometimes the greatest victory is not just surviving the storm, but becoming the lighthouse that guides others safely home. What did this story teach you about how individual dignity can become collective transformation? Drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories